His throne, her downfall, their war. Elena Salvatore had spent her life hearing whispers about the man who had raised her. But when her father was assassinated and the men who once feared him turned their attention to her, she knew one thing: there was only one person left who could keep her alive. The man her father had once called a brother. The man who stood at the edge of the funeral, waiting. "You have enemies," he murmured when she approached. "But not nearly as many as I do. Are you sure you want to stand beside me?" Chapter 1. The scent of gunpowder and lilies. The air in the church was thick, a cloying blend of incense, lilies, and the metallic tang of fear that Elena Salvatore had come to recognize as the perfume of death. It clung to the heavy velvet drapes, the polished marble floors, and the somber, black-clad figures that filled the pews of St. Ignatius. Her father, Don Antonio Salvatore, lay in a gleaming mahogany casket at the front, a stark contrast to the vibrant, ruthless man he had been in life. Lilies, his favorite, overflowed around him, their sweetness a morbid counterpoint to the scent she couldn't quite escape: the faint, lingering odor of gunpowder. Elena, at 58, felt the weight of every one of those years. The fine lines around her hazel eyes, etched deeper by grief and a lifetime of carefully guarded emotions, seemed to hold the stories of 1,000 whispered secrets. Her once vibrant auburn hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back in a severe bun, accentuating the sharp angles of her face, a face that mirrored her father's in its strength and unwavering resolve. She wore black, of course, a simple, elegant dress that spoke of quiet mourning, not the ostentatious display expected of a mafia don's daughter. But beneath the fabric, a delicate silver chain held a single charm: a miniature, intricately carved skull, a memento mori, a constant reminder of the world she inhabited. The priest's voice droned on, his words a blur of Latin and platitudes, painting a picture of a generous philanthropist, a devoted family man. Elena almost scoffed. Philanthropist? Yes, her father had donated generously to the church, to hospitals, to orphanages. Devoted family man? He had loved her mother fiercely, until her death 10 years prior, and he had protected Elena with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. But those acts of kindness and love were interwoven with a darkness, a brutality that had earned him the moniker Il Diavolo, the devil. She felt the eyes on her, assessing, calculating. The men who had once bowed their heads in respect to her father now looked at her with a chilling mixture of pity and predatory interest. Don Antonio's death had left a vacuum, a power void that these vultures were eager to fill. And she, his only child, his heir, was either an obstacle to be removed or a prize to be claimed. Her cousin Marco, a man whose oily charm barely concealed his ambition, placed a hand on her arm. His touch was too familiar, too possessive. "Elena, mia cara, you must be strong. Your father would have wanted you to be strong." She met his gaze, her eyes devoid of tears. She had shed her tears in private, in the quiet solitude of her father's study, surrounded by the ghosts of his past. "I am strong, Marco," she said, her voice low and steady. "Stronger than you think." He squeezed her arm, a subtle warning disguised as comfort. "Of course you are. But you will need allies. You will need guidance." Elena gently disengaged her arm. "I have all the guidance I need." She didn't elaborate. Her father, even in death, had provided. He had left instructions, sealed letters, and a name that echoed with both fear and a strange, unsettling hope. As the service ended and the pallbearers, men who had served her father with unwavering loyalty, carried the casket out of the church, Elena felt a presence shift in the shadows at the back. A figure detached itself from the gloom, tall and imposing, his face obscured by the dim light. He moved with a silent grace, a predator navigating his hunting grounds. It was him,
Alessandro Moretti,
the man her father had once called brother, before the betrayal, before the blood feud that had separated them for 20 years. The man who was now, according to her father's final letter, her only hope of survival. He stood at a distance, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His eyes, the color of dark storm clouds, held a depth of sorrow and something else, a guarded wariness, perhaps, or even a flicker of regret. He was older, of course, the lines on his face deeper, his dark hair now heavily silvered at the temples, but the power he exuded was undiminished. He wore a tailored black suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean physique. A single, heavy gold ring, bearing the Moretti family crest, a coiled serpent, adorned his left hand. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring condolences and casting sidelong glances at Elena and the man who stood apart. Alessandro didn't move, didn't speak, simply waited. He was a stark contrast to the fawning sycophants who surrounded her, a silent island of strength in a sea of treacherous currents. Elena took a deep breath, the scent of lilies and gunpowder now mixed with a crisp, clean scent of the approaching Roman evening. She straightened her shoulders, summoning the resilience that had been bred into her, the legacy of Il Diavolo. She walked towards him, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor, each step a declaration, a challenge. As she reached him, she stopped, meeting his gaze without flinching. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken history, with years of animosity and a shared past that was both a bond and a burden. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble, roughened by time and the weight of his own secrets. "You have enemies, Elena." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. A truth she already knew. She nodded, her voice steady. "I know." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching, probing. Then, he delivered the words that would change her life forever. "But not nearly as many as I do. Are you sure you want to stand beside me?" The question hung in the air, a challenge, an invitation, a threat, and a promise all rolled into one. It was a question that demanded an answer that would determine not only her future, but also her very survival. The scent of lilies seemed to fade, replaced by the sharp, intoxicating scent of danger, of the unknown, of a path that led into the heart of darkness, and perhaps, just perhaps, towards a glimmer of light. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Shadow of St. Michael's. The shadow of Castel Sant'Angelo, topped by the imposing statue of Archangel Michael, stretched long and dark across the cobblestone piazza. The Tiber River, a ribbon of black silk under the twilight sky, whispered secrets as it flowed past. Elena stood beside Alessandro, the chill Roman air raising goosebumps on her arms, a sensation amplified by the weight of his question. "Stand beside you?" Elena echoed, her voice barely a whisper against the backdrop of the city's muted sounds. "You haven't spoken to my father in 20 years. You were enemies." Alessandro's gaze didn't waver. "Enemies, yes. But also brothers."
Once.
He paused, the word hanging heavy in the air, a testament to a bond broken by betrayal, a betrayal Elena only knew through fragmented whispers and her father's carefully veiled pronouncements. "Antonio and we shared a bond thicker than blood. We built an empire together, side by side." Until he trailed off, his jaw tightening, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "Until what?" Elena pressed, needing to understand, to unravel the tangled threads of the past that were now ensnaring her present. Alessandro sighed, the sound a mixture of weariness and regret. "Until ambition and lies tore us apart. A story for another time, perhaps. Tonight, we have more pressing concerns." He gestured with a subtle nod towards a black sedan parked discreetly across the piazza. "My car is waiting. We need to leave."
Now. Elena hesitated.
Trusting Alessandro Moretti was akin to walking a tightrope over a chasm filled with vipers. Yet, her father's letter, clutched tightly in her purse, burned with the urgency of his final plea. "Trust Alessandro. He is the only one who can protect you." She glanced back at the receding crowd from the funeral, noticing the lingering gazes, the furtive whispers. Marco's face, a mask of carefully crafted concern, stood out among them. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that her cousin's concern was a facade, a prelude to a power grab. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice regaining its composure. "Somewhere safe. Alessandro replied, his tone offering no further explanation.
Somewhere we can talk.
Somewhere they won't find you. The they hung unspoken, a collective noun encompassing the rivals, the betrayers, the wolves circling, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Elena knew them, had grown up surrounded by them, had learned to recognize the glint of malice in their eyes, the veiled threats in their honeyed words. She made her decision. It was a leap of faith, a plunge into the unknown, but it was a choice driven by instinct, by the primal need to survive. All right, she said, her voice firm. Let's go. Alessandro offered her his arm, a gesture both old-fashioned and strangely comforting. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his hand warm and strong against her skin. As they walked towards the car, she felt a strange sense of not peace, not yet, but a lessening of the crushing weight of fear that had been her constant companion since her father's death. The car's interior was luxurious and understated, the leather seats soft and supple, the air scented with a subtle blend of sandalwood and something else, something uniquely Alessandro, a hint of steel, and something wilder, untamed. As they drove away, Elena looked back at Castel Sant'Angelo, the angel's bronze wings glinting in the fading light. It felt like a farewell, a turning point, a crossing of a threshold into a world where the rules were different, where survival depended on trust, on instinct, and on the unlikely alliance she had just forged. Alessandro drove with a quiet focus, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, his body alert, a warrior navigating enemy territory. He didn't speak, allowing Elena the space to gather her thoughts, to process the whirlwind of events that had swept her from the familiar world of grief and mourning into this shadowy realm of danger and uncertainty. My father, he left me instructions, Elena finally said, breaking the silence. He said you would know what to do. Alessandro glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Antonio always did have a flair for the dramatic. And a penchant for secrets. He paused. What did he tell you? He said there was a threat. Something bigger than the usual rivalries. Something hidden. Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He said you were the only one who could unravel it. Alessandro's grip tightened on the steering wheel.
He was right about that.
There are forces at play, Elena, that even your father only glimpsed. Old debts, old grudges, things that have been buried for decades, now resurfacing. And these forces, they want me dead? They want what you represent. Your father's legacy. His power. His secrets. Alessandro's voice was grim. And yes, some of them would prefer you dead. Others, they have other plans for you. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. The vague fears of the past few hours were solidifying, taking shape, becoming tangible threats. What kind of plans? Alessandro didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. Plans that involve control. Plans that involve using you as a pawn in their games. Plans that involve marriage. The word hung in the air, a cold, hard reality. Elena had always known that marriage, in her world, was rarely about love. It was about alliances, about consolidating power, about securing bloodlines. But the thought of being forced into a marriage with one of her father's enemies, with one of the men who might have even orchestrated his death, was a prospect that filled her with a cold, visceral dread. A feeling of impending doom was settling upon her. Would Alessandro reveal something more, or was this silence a plan of its own? Chapter 3. The weight of a father's legacy. The safe house was not what Elena had expected. Instead of a heavily guarded fortress, it was a modest, unassuming apartment in Trastevere, a vibrant neighborhood known for its narrow, winding streets, its bohemian atmosphere, and its hidden courtyards. The building itself was ancient, its walls covered in ivy, its windows overlooking a small, enclosed garden filled with fragrant herbs and blooming jasmine. This is it? Elena asked, surprised. It seems ordinary. Alessandro unlocked the heavy wooden door, revealing a surprisingly spacious and elegantly furnished interior. Ordinary is good, he replied. Ordinary is invisible. In this world, blending in is the best defense. The apartment was a study in contrasts. Antique furniture, lovingly restored, sat alongside modern technology, a state-of-the-art security system, discreetly hidden cameras, and a sleek, minimalist kitchen. The walls were adorned with paintings, not the opulent masterpieces one might expect in a mafia don's hideout, but rather landscapes and still lives, chosen for their calming beauty rather than their ostentatious value. My father, he wouldn't have chosen this, Elena observed, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the details. Alessandro smiled, a rare, fleeting expression that softened his features. No, he wouldn't have. Antonio preferred to be seen, to be feared. I prefer to be underestimated. He gestured towards a comfortable-looking armchair. Make yourself comfortable. We have much to discuss. Elena settled into the armchair, feeling the tension slowly easing from her shoulders. The apartment, despite its unfamiliarity, exuded a sense of calm, a quiet refuge from the storm raging outside. Alessandro poured 2 glasses of wine, a rich, ruby-red Barolo, and handed one to Elena. To survival, he said, raising his glass. Elena clinked her glass against his, the sound delicate and resonant in the quiet room. To survival, she echoed, taking a sip of the wine. It was smooth and full-bodied, a welcome warmth spreading through her chilled body. Your father's letter, Alessandro began, settling into the opposite armchair. He mentioned a threat. A hidden threat. Can you tell me more?
Elena hesitated.
She had read the letter multiple times, each time deciphering a new layer of meaning, a new hint of the danger that lurked beneath the surface. He wrote about a betrayal that went back years, decades even. He said it involved your family. And mine. Alessandro nodded, his expression grim. The betrayal.
Yes.
It's the root of all this. The reason we became enemies.
The reason your father is dead.
But what was it?
Elena pressed.
What happened? Alessandro took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on some distant point, lost in the memories of the past. It started with a woman, he said, his voice low and laced with a pain that was still raw, even after all these years. Isabella. My sister. Elena leaned forward, her interest piqued. This was a story she had never heard, a piece of the puzzle that had always been missing. Isabella was vibrant, beautiful, full of life. She was also reckless. Alessandro paused, choosing his words carefully. She fell in love with a man your father disapproved of. A man from a rival family. And my father, he forbade the relationship? He did more than forbid it, Alessandro said, his voice hardening. He arranged for her to be married to someone else. Someone he considered suitable. Someone who would strengthen his alliance with another powerful family. Elena felt a knot forming in her stomach. She could see where this was going, could feel the echoes of her own potential fate in Isabella's story. She refused, Alessandro continued. She ran away. She tried to elope with the man she loved. And Alessandro's voice dropped to a whisper. And they were found.
Dead.
In a car at the bottom of a ravine. It was ruled an accident.
Elena gasped.
An accident? Alessandro shook his head.
No.
It was no accident. Your father, he orchestrated it. He couldn't bear the shame, the defiance. He had them killed. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Her father, the man she had loved, the man she had respected, had been capable of such cold-blooded cruelty. The weight of his legacy, already heavy, now felt crushing. But why are you telling me this now? Elena asked, her voice trembling. Why are you helping me after all that? Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotion, sorrow, regret, and something else, a flicker of hope, perhaps? Because, he said, his voice firm, Isabella's death was not the only betrayal. There was another, a deeper one, a betrayal that involved your father, myself, and a secret that could destroy us all. He paused, letting the words sink in. And that secret, he continued, is now in your hands. You are the key, Elena. The key to unlocking the truth. And the key to stopping the cycle of violence, of betrayal, of death. He stood up, his movements decisive. But first, he said, you need to understand the rules of this game. You need to understand the world you've inherited. You need to understand the weight of being a Salvatore. He walked towards a large, antique desk, its surface covered in papers, maps, and photographs. He picked up a photograph, a faded black and white image of a group of young men, their faces full of youthful arrogance and ambition. Among them, she recognized a younger version of her father and a younger, equally striking Alessandro. This, he said, holding up the photograph, is where it all began. And this, he added, tapping the desk, is where we will unravel it. Together. The unspoken challenge, the unspoken promise, hung in the air, heavier than the scent of old wood and secrets that permeated the room. How far was she willing to go to uncover these truths? Chapter 4. An offer made in the cloak of midnight. Alessandro spread the documents across the desk, a tapestry of the past unfurling before Elena's eyes. Faded photographs, handwritten letters in elegant, spidery script, maps marked with cryptic symbols, and financial records detailing transactions that spanned decades. It was a daunting, overwhelming archive of her father's life, of Alessandro's life, of a world she had only glimpsed from the periphery. This, Alessandro said, pointing to a document written in Italian, is a copy of the original Omerta, the Code of Silence, sworn by the founding members of our families. Your grandfather, my grandfather, and several others. Elena leaned closer, trying to decipher the archaic language. It speaks of loyalty, of honor, of silence. Yes, Alessandro agreed. But it also speaks of power, of territory, of control. These men, they built an empire on these principles. An empire built on blood and fear. He moved on to another document, a letter written in her father's handwriting. This is a letter your father wrote to me shortly before Isabella's death. He accuses me of treachery, of plotting against him, of inciting Isabella's rebellion. Elena read the letter, her heart aching at the venomous words, the accusations, the raw hatred that poured from the page. It was a stark contrast to the image she had of her father, the loving, protective man who had shielded her from the darkness of his world. But it wasn't true, was it? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro shook his head.
No.
It was a lie, a fabrication designed to justify what he had done, to turn me into the enemy, to solidify his power. He continued to guide her through the documents, explaining the intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and betrayals that had shaped their family's history. He showed her evidence of her father's ruthless dealings, his manipulation of rivals, his cold-blooded elimination of threats. He also showed her evidence of his own struggles, his attempts to maintain some semblance of honor in a world that had become increasingly corrupt. As the hours passed, Elena felt a growing sense of unease, a sense of disorientation. The world she thought she knew was crumbling around her, replaced by a reality far more complex, far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Why are you showing me all this? She asked, her voice tired, her mind reeling from the weight of the revelations. Alessandro met her gaze, his eyes serious. Because you need to understand. You need to know the truth about your father, about your family, about the world you've inherited. You need to know who your enemies are. And you need to know who you can trust. He paused, then added, his voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. And you need to know that I am not your enemy, Elena. I never was. The words hung in the air, a silent plea, a declaration of intent. Elena searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of ulterior motive. But all she saw was sincerity, a deep, unwavering conviction. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted, her voice trembling. Alessandro reached out and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and reassuring, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her emotions. Believe this, he said, his voice firm. I will protect you, Elena. I will help you navigate this world. I will help you find the truth. And I will help you survive. His words were a promise, a vow, spoken in the cloak of midnight, in the heart of a hidden refuge. It was an offer of alliance, of protection, of something more, something that sent a shiver of both fear and anticipation through her.
But why?
Elena asked, her voice hesitant. Why would you do this for me? After everything that happened, after everything my father did to you? Alessandro's grip tightened on her hand. Because, he said, his voice laced with a complex mixture of emotions, I owe it to Isabella. I owe it to your father, to the brother he once was. And he paused, his gaze locking with hers. I owe it to you. The unspoken words, the unacknowledged feelings, hung between them, creating a tension that was both electric and unsettling. Elena felt a pull towards him, a connection that defied logic, that transcended the years of animosity and betrayal. There is one more thing, Alessandro said, breaking the silence. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, velvet box. He opened it, revealing a ring. It was a magnificent piece of jewelry, a large, emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller diamonds, set in platinum. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but also intimidating. This, Alessandro said, was your mother's ring. Your father gave it to her when they were engaged. He wanted you to have it. Elena stared at the ring, her eyes wide with surprise. She had never seen it before. Her mother had always worn a simple gold band, never anything as ostentatious as this. He kept it hidden? She asked.
Alessandro nodded.
He said it was too painful to look at. But he wanted you to have it when the time was right. He picked up the ring and held it out to her. The time is right, Elena. Wear it. As a symbol of your strength. As a symbol of your legacy. As a symbol of our alliance. The ring was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of her heritage, of her family's power, of the burden she now carried. It was also a symbol of the dangerous path she was about to embark on, a path that would require courage, resilience, and trust. She knew that she could still back out, though the options seemed to be fading with every minute. Would accepting the ring change things between her and Alessandro? Chapter 5. Echoes of Betrayal in the Villa Walls. Elena hesitated, her gaze fixed on the ring. It shimmered in the dim light, a beacon of the past, a promise of the future, a weight of responsibility. Accepting it felt like a commitment, a crossing of a line from which there would be no return. She began, her voice uncertain. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Alessandro's expression softened. He didn't press her, didn't try to force the ring on her. He simply waited, his gaze patient, understanding. It's all right to be afraid, Elena, he said gently. This is a lot to take in. But you are stronger than you think. You are your father's daughter, yes, but you are also your own woman. You have a strength he never possessed, a compassion. His words resonated with her, striking a chord deep within her soul. She had always felt a sense of unease, a disconnect between the love she felt for her father and the whispers of his ruthlessness that she had overheard throughout her life. She had always strived to be different, to be better, to temper the ruthlessness with kindness, the power with empathy. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She reached out and took the ring. It felt heavy in her hand, cold against her skin. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Thank you, she said, her voice gaining strength. For everything. Alessandro smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You don't need to thank me, Elena. We're in this together now. He gestured towards the documents spread across the desk. We have a lot of work to do. We need to find out who is behind this threat, who is trying to resurrect the past. And we need to stop them. They spent the rest of the night poring over the documents, piecing together the fragments of information, searching for clues. Alessandro explained the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that made up the Roman underworld, the names of the key players, the hidden connections, the unspoken codes. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, Elena felt a sense of exhaustion, but also a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a grieving daughter, a potential victim. She was a player in the game, a force to be reckoned with. We need to go to the villa, Alessandro said, breaking the silence. Elena looked at him, surprised. The villa? My father's villa?
Alessandro nodded. Yes.
It's where he kept his most important secrets. It's where we'll find the answers we need. The villa. Elena hadn't been there since her father's death. It was a place of both cherished memories and unsettling shadows, a place where she had spent her childhood, a place where she had learned the rules of her father's world. The thought of returning there filled her with a mixture of dread and anticipation. "Is it safe?"
she asked.
Alessandro's expression was grim. "It's as safe as we can make it. I've had my men sweep it for surveillance, for any signs of tampering. But we need to be careful. We need to be vigilant." They left the apartment before the city fully awoke, driving through the quiet streets in Alessandro's unmarked car. The villa was located on the outskirts of Rome, nestled among rolling hills and vineyards, a sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. As they approached the villa, Elena felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The memories came flooding back, the laughter, the games, the whispered conversations, the sense of power and privilege that had permeated every corner of the estate. But also the fear, the unease, the constant awareness of the hidden dangers that lurked beneath the surface. Alessandro parked the car in a discreet location, hidden from view. They entered the villa through a side entrance, bypassing the main gate and the watchful eyes of the security cameras. The interior was dark and silent, the air heavy with the scent of dust and old memories. "Stay close to me," Alessandro whispered, his hand resting lightly on her back, a gesture of protection. They moved through the villa like ghosts, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The rooms were filled with antique furniture, opulent tapestries, and priceless works of art, the trappings of wealth and power. But beneath the veneer of elegance, Elena sensed a lingering darkness, a residue of her father's ruthlessness, a whisper of betrayal. Alessandro led her to her father's study, a large, imposing room dominated by a massive mahogany desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The room was exactly as she remembered it, as if her father had just stepped out for a moment. "This is where he kept his secrets," Alessandro said, his voice low. "This is where we'll find the truth." He began to search the room, methodically, systematically. He opened drawers, examined papers, scanned bookshelves, his movements precise and efficient. Elena watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt like an intruder in her own home, a stranger in a familiar land. As Alessandro was examining a hidden compartment behind a painting, Elena noticed something out of place. A small, antique music box, sitting on a shelf, its lid slightly ajar. She remembered that music box. Her mother had given it to her father many years ago. It played a hauntingly beautiful melody, a melody that had always filled Elena with a sense of melancholy. She picked up the music box, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its surface. She opened the lid, and the melody began to play, its delicate notes filling the silent room. But something was different. There was a faint clicking sound, a subtle disruption in the melody. Elena examined the music box more closely. She noticed a small, almost invisible button on the side. She pressed it. The music stopped. A hidden compartment sprung open, revealing a small, rolled-up piece of parchment. "Alessandro," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think I found something." He turned, his eyes widening as he saw the parchment in her hand. He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her. He carefully unrolled the parchment. It was a letter, written in her father's handwriting, but it was addressed to someone else. Someone Elena had never heard of. The name at the top of the letter made her blood run cold. The implications were terrifying. Who was this person, and what did it mean for her and Alessandro? Chapter 6. The Dance of Deception and Desire. The name at the top of the letter was Serafina Rossi. Elena had never heard of her. Alessandro, however, reacted with a sharp intake of breath, his face paling. "Serafina Rossi," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought she was dead." "Who is she?" Elena asked, her heart pounding. "What does this mean?" Alessandro didn't answer immediately. He carefully read the letter, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently as he deciphered her father's words. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece, each tick a stark reminder of the passage of time, of the urgency of their situation. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of dread and something else. Something that looked like fear? Serafina Rossi, he said, his voice heavy with unspoken implications, was as a legend. A ghost. They call her La Vedova Nera, the Black Widow. She was a rival, a contemporary of your father and mine. More powerful, some say. More ruthless. But I've never heard of her, Elena said, confused. That's because she disappeared. 20 years ago. Right around the time of Isabella's death. Everyone assumed she was dead. Killed in a power struggle. Or vanished into thin air. Alessandro shook his head. But this letter proves she's alive. And that your father was working with her. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The Black Widow. The name itself was chilling, evocative of danger, of death, of a hidden power that lurked in the shadows. Working with her?
On what?
Alessandro scanned the letter again. It's vague, but it speaks of a partnership, a joint venture, something to do with consolidating power, eliminating rivals, creating a new order. A new order? Elena echoed, her voice trembling. What kind of new order? Alessandro didn't answer. He was staring at the letter, his gaze fixed on a particular passage.
There's a code, he said.
A cipher. Your father used it frequently. I think I can break it. He pulled out a small notebook and pen from his pocket and began to work, his brow furrowed in concentration. Elena watched him, her mind racing. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Her father, the man she thought she knew, had been involved in a secret alliance with a woman known as the Black Widow, a woman who was supposed to be dead. And this alliance was aimed at what? Overthrowing the existing power structure? Creating a new, even more ruthless regime? As Alessandro worked, the silence in the room became charged with a different kind of tension. The proximity, the shared danger, the weight of the secrets they were uncovering, created an intimacy that was both unsettling and exhilarating. Elena found herself drawn to Alessandro, to his strength, his intelligence, his unwavering focus. She felt a flicker of something more than gratitude, something more than alliance, something that she hadn't felt in years, something that she thought she had buried long ago. She caught herself staring at him, at the way the light caught the silver in his hair, at the lines of concentration etched on his face, at the strength of his hands as he worked on the cipher. She quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own thoughts, by the unexpected surge of desire that coursed through her. Alessandro suddenly looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He had broken the code. I've got it, he said, his voice a low murmur. The letter, it refers to a meeting. A meeting that is supposed to take place tonight. Tonight?
Elena gasped.
Where? Alessandro pointed to a series of coordinates written at the bottom of the letter.
Here, he said.
An old abandoned warehouse on the docks. Elena felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was their chance to confront the threat, to unravel the mystery, to find out what Serafina Rossi, the Black Widow, wanted. We have to go, she said, her voice firm.
Alessandro nodded. Yes.
But we need to be careful. This could be a trap. He looked at her, his eyes searching, questioning. Are you sure you're ready for this, Elena? She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with determination. She was afraid, yes, but she was also exhilarated. She was tired of being a victim, tired of living in the shadows. She was ready to fight, to claim her legacy, to face her enemies. I'm ready, she said, her voice clear and strong. Alessandro smiled, a brief, fleeting expression, but it was enough to send a shiver of warmth through her. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. Then let's go, he said. And let's show them what it means to be a Salvatore.
And a Moretti.
The feeling, growing more intense, made Elena wonder if she had made some sort of mistake. This was going to change everything, wasn't it? Chapter 7. Scars Beneath the Silk. The abandoned warehouse stood silhouetted against the inky sky, a hulking behemoth of rusted metal and broken windows. The docks were eerily quiet, The only sounds the gentle lapping of the water against the pilings and the distant cry of a seagull. The air was thick with the smell of salt, decay, and a faint, metallic tang that Elena recognized as the scent of danger. Alessandro parked the car several blocks away, choosing a shadowed alleyway where it would be hidden from view. "We go on foot from here," he said, his voice low. "And we stay in the shadows." He checked his weapon, a sleek, black pistol that he carried concealed beneath his jacket. Elena felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach, but she pushed it down, replacing it with a steely resolve. She had come this far. She wouldn't back down now. They moved through the shadows like phantoms, their footsteps silent on the cracked pavement. Alessandro's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her, protecting her. She could feel the tension in his body, the alertness of a predator on the hunt. As they approached the warehouse, they saw signs of activity. A single, dim light flickered inside, casting long, distorted shadows. Several cars, expensive and dark, were parked nearby, their engines still warm. "They're here," Alessandro whispered. "Stay close to me, and be ready for anything." They found a side entrance, a rusted metal door that was slightly ajar. Alessandro carefully pushed it open, revealing a vast, cavernous space filled with stacks of crates, discarded machinery, and the ghosts of forgotten industry. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. They moved slowly, cautiously, their senses on high alert. The only light came from the single flickering bulb in the center of the room, casting a dim, eerie glow. They could hear voices, muffled and indistinct, coming from somewhere deeper inside the warehouse. Alessandro signaled for Elena to stay behind him. He moved forward, his weapon drawn, his body tense and ready. Elena followed, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, a sense of being caught in a whirlwind of events that were both terrifying and strangely liberating. They reached a large, open area in the center of the warehouse. A group of figures were gathered around a makeshift table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. Elena recognized some of them faces from her father's world, faces of men who had once been his allies, his rivals, his enemies. And then she saw her. Standing at the head of the table, her back to them, was a woman. She was tall and slender, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress that clung to her figure. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back like a silken waterfall. She exuded an aura of power, of control, of danger. This, Elena knew, was Serafina Rossi, the Black Widow. Alessandro stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "Serafina," he said, "we need to talk." The woman slowly turned around.
Elena Gasped.
Serafina Rossi was not what she had expected. She was not old, not withered, not the crone-like figure Elena had imagined. She was beautiful, strikingly so. Her face was ageless, her skin smooth and flawless, her eyes dark and piercing. She looked to be in her early 50s, but her beauty was timeless, captivating, and unsettling. A faint smile played on Serafina's lips. "Alessandro Moretti," she said, her voice a low, melodious purr. "How unexpected. And you brought a guest." Her gaze shifted to Elena, her eyes narrowing slightly.
Elena Salvatore.
"The Devil's Daughter. I've been expecting you." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. Serafina's gaze was like a physical touch, cold and probing. "What do you want, Serafina?" Alessandro asked, his voice devoid of any warmth. Serafina's smile widened.
"What?"
"My dear Alessandro, I want what is rightfully mine."
"What was promised to me? What your family stole from me."
"Stole from you?"
Alessandro scoffed.
"You are the one who betrayed us. You are the one who disappeared." Serafina laughed, a low, throaty sound that echoed through the warehouse. "Disappeared? No, my dear Alessandro. I was waiting, planning, biding my time." She gestured towards the men gathered around the table. "These men, they understand. They know the truth. They know that the old order is crumbling, that a new order is needed. An order led by me." "And what about Elena?" Alessandro asked, his gaze unwavering. What is her role in your new order? Serafina's eyes locked with Elena's. Elena, she said, her voice soft and seductive, is the key. The key to uniting our families. The key to consolidating our power. Uniting our families? Elena repeated, her voice trembling.
How?
Serafina's smile was chilling. By marriage, my dear. By marriage. She took a step forward. As she did, the light caught her left hand. A glint of gold. Elena's gaze moved and locked onto the ring, a very specific, familiar ring. It was a mirror image of the one she now wore. This reveal was starting to answer far too many questions at once. Chapter 8. A pact forged in the heart of the storm. Elena stared at the ring on Serafina's finger, a mirror image of her own, a symbol of a connection she hadn't known existed, a connection that sent a wave of nausea through her. Marriage? Elena repeated, her voice barely a whisper. To whom? Serafina's smile widened, a predatory gleam in her eyes. To my son, of course. Lorenzo. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a young man in his late 20s, tall and handsome, with dark hair and eyes that mirrored his mother's cold, calculating and unsettling. He looked at Elena with a possessive gaze, a look that made her skin crawl. Lorenzo, Serafina said, introducing him with a flourish, is the future. He is the one who will unite our families, who will bring about the new order. And you, Elena, will be his queen. Elena felt a surge of anger, of defiance. She would not be a pawn in their games. She would not be forced into a marriage with this stranger, this son of a woman who is clearly her enemy. I will never marry him, Elena said, her voice firm, her eyes flashing with defiance. Serafina laughed, a dismissive sound. You have no choice, my dear. It is your destiny. It is written in the stars. Alessandro stepped forward, his body shielding Elena from Lorenzo's gaze. She has a choice, he said, his voice hard, his eyes locked with Serafina's.
And she chooses me.
The words hung in the air, a challenge, a declaration, a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the room. The men around the table murmured, their eyes shifting between Alessandro and Serafina, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion and fear. Serafina's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening.
Chiudere di fime, Alessandro.
She hissed. You dare interfere with my plans? Your plans are built on lies, Serafina, Alessandro retorted. On betrayal. On the blood of innocent people. I won't let you use Elena. I won't let you destroy everything we could build. Build? Serafina scoffed. You have nothing to build, Alessandro. You are a relic of the past. A ghost. Just like me. Perhaps, Alessandro said, his voice low and intense. But ghosts can still fight. And ghosts can still love. He turned to Elena, his eyes softening, his gaze filled with a tenderness that she had never seen before. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. Elena, he said, his voice gentle, will you stand with me? Will you fight with me? Will you trust me? It was a moment of truth, a moment of decision, a moment that would determine their fate. Elena looked at Alessandro, at his strong, honest face, at the love and determination in his eyes. She looked at Serafina, at her cold, calculating gaze, at the web of lies and deceit that surrounded her. She looked at Lorenzo, at his possessive, unsettling stare. And she knew what she had to do. She squeezed Alessandro's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I will, she said, her voice clear and strong. I will stand with you. I will fight with you. I trust you. A storm had been brewing outside, mirroring the tempest within the warehouse. As Elena spoke, a clap of thunder echoed through the room, followed by a flash of lightning that illuminated the scene, casting long, dramatic shadows. The rain began to fall, a torrential downpour that hammered against the metal roof of the warehouse. Serafina's face was a mask of fury. So be it, she hissed. Then you have chosen your fate. You have chosen war. She raised her hand, a signal to the men around the table. They moved forward, their hands reaching for their weapons. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Alessandro pushed Elena behind him, shielding her with his body. He drew his weapon, his movements swift and decisive. He was a warrior, a protector, a man fighting for the woman he loved. The unacknowledged word, the unspoken feeling, hung in the air, as palpable as the scent of gunpowder and rain. It was a battle, and she felt strangely ready. Where would this night take them? Chapter 9. The serpent's gaze across the table. The first shot rang out, shattering the tense silence. Elena ducked instinctively, the sound echoing in her ears. Alessandro returned fire, his aim precise and deadly. The warehouse transformed into a battleground, a chaotic dance of shadows and gunfire. Elena found herself pressed against a stack of crates, Alessandro's body a shield between her and the danger. She could hear the grunts of men, the shouts, the screams, the shattering of glass. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. She peered around Alessandro's shoulder, trying to make sense of the chaos. She saw Lorenzo, his face contorted in a snarl, firing his weapon wildly. She saw Serafina, standing calmly amidst the chaos, her eyes fixed on Alessandro, a chilling smile on her lips. This is madness. Elena shouted over the din. We need to get out of here. Alessandro nodded, his eyes scanning the room, searching for an escape route. Stay close to me, he said, his voice tight with urgency. And don't let go. He fired another shot, hitting one of Serafina's men. The man crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering on the concrete floor. Alessandro grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her towards a side exit, a narrow door that led to a loading dock. They ran, dodging bullets, weaving through the maze of crates and machinery. Elena's heart was pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had never been in a situation like this before, never faced such raw, visceral danger. They reached the side exit. Alessandro kicked it open, revealing the stormy night outside. The rain was still falling, a torrential downpour that soaked them to the bone. The wind howled, whipping their hair and clothes.
Run!
Alessandro shouted, pushing her towards the darkness. Run to the car. Elena ran, her legs pumping, her lungs burning. She could hear Alessandro behind her, his footsteps pounding on the wet pavement. She could hear the shouts of their pursuers, the sound of gunfire. She reached the alleyway where Alessandro had parked the car. She fumbled for the keys in her purse, her hands trembling. She found them, unlocked the car, and jumped inside. Alessandro slid into the driver's seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He started the engine, the roar of the engine a welcome sound in the midst of the chaos. He slammed the car into reverse and sped out of the alleyway, tires screeching. They drove through the rain-slicked streets, Alessandro navigating the narrow, winding roads with a skill that bordered on reckless. Elena looked back, her heart pounding. She could see the headlights of several cars following them, their pursuers relentless. They're gaining on us, she shouted. Alessandro gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. He took a sharp turn, swerving to avoid an oncoming vehicle. The car fishtailed, almost losing control.
Hold on,
he shouted. He accelerated, pushing the car to its limits. The engine roared, the tires screamed. They were in a desperate race for survival, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Elena looked at Alessandro, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. He was focused, determined, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She felt a surge of admiration for him, a sense of gratitude, a sense of something more. Suddenly, a car pulled alongside them, its windows dark and menacing. A shot rang out, shattering the driver's side window.
Alessandro swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision. Get down,
he shouted, pushing Elena's head down. More shots rang out, bullets piercing the car's body. Elena crouched low, her body trembling. She could feel the fear, the adrenaline, the sense of impending doom. Alessandro fought back, firing his weapon out the shattered window. He hit one of the tires of the pursuing car. The car swerved, losing control, and crashed into a lamppost. But there were more cars behind them, still pursuing them, their headlights like the eyes of hungry wolves. Alessandro took another sharp turn, entering a narrow, winding road that led up into the hills. The road was treacherous, the rain making it slippery and dangerous. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," Alessandro replied, his voice tight. "Somewhere they won't find us." He drove on, pushing the car to its limits, navigating the treacherous road with a skill born of desperation. The pursuit continued, a deadly dance in the heart of the storm. The outcome was anything but clear, and Elena knew that one way or another, they would reach their destination. But together or apart. Chapter 10. Masks and Mirrors in the Moonlight. The somewhere safe turned out to be an old, abandoned monastery perched high on a cliff overlooking the city. The road leading to it was barely more than a dirt track, winding precariously along the edge of the precipice. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, obscuring the moon and casting the landscape in a deep, impenetrable darkness. Alessandro brought the battered car to a halt in a small, overgrown courtyard. The monastery was a ruin, its walls crumbling, its windows dark and empty. It looked like a place forgotten by time, a ghost of a bygone era. "This is it?" Elena asked, her voice filled with a mixture of apprehension and exhaustion. "It's safe," Alessandro replied, his voice weary. "No one knows about this place. Except me." He got out of the car, his body stiff and aching. Elena followed, her legs shaky from the adrenaline and the fear. She looked around, her eyes trying to penetrate the darkness. The monastery seemed to exude an aura of melancholy, of secrets, of forgotten prayers. Alessandro led her through a crumbling archway and into the main building. The interior was damp and cold, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. The moonlight, filtering through broken windows, cast eerie shadows on the walls. "We'll be safe here for tonight," Alessandro said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "We can rest, regroup, and figure out what to do next." He found a relatively dry corner and spread out a blanket that he had retrieved from the trunk of the car. Elena sat down, huddled in the blanket, her body shivering from the cold and the lingering fear. Alessandro sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. He offered her a small flask of brandy. "Drink this," he said. "It will help." Elena took a sip, the fiery liquid burning her throat but warming her from the inside out. She looked at Alessandro, his face illuminated by the faint moonlight. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his face lined with worry. But he also looked resolute, determined. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For saving me. Again."
Alessandro smiled, a weary smile.
"We saved each other, Elena. We're a team now." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows. Elena found herself studying Alessandro's face, tracing the lines of his profile, the curve of his jaw, the silver in his hair. She felt a strange sense of peace, sitting there beside him, in this ruined monastery, in the heart of the darkness. "Serafina," Elena said, breaking the silence. She said she was waiting. Planning. What was she planning?
Alessandro sighed.
She was planning to rebuild her empire. To reclaim the power she lost 20 years ago. To use you to unite the families and create a new dynasty. But why me? Elena asked. Why not someone else? Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. Because you are your father's daughter. Because you are strong, resilient. Because you have a fire in you that she recognizes. A fire that she wants to control. He paused, then added, his voice dropping to a low murmur. And because you remind her of someone. Someone she lost. Someone she loved. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. Who? She asked.
Alessandro hesitated.
Your mother, he said softly. Serafina, and your mother, they were close. Very close. Before everything happened. Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. This was another piece of the puzzle, another layer of the mystery that she was struggling to unravel. Her mother and Serafina Rossi? What was the nature of their relationship? What secrets had they shared? They were friends? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro shook his head. More than friends, he said. They were like sisters. Inseparable. Until your father came between them. My father?
Elena repeated, confused. Alessandro nodded.
Your father, he was obsessed with your mother. He wanted her, no matter the cost. And Serafina, she stood in his way. He paused, his gaze fixed on some distant point, lost in the memories of the past. Your father, he manipulated the situation. He created a rift between them. He made your mother believe that Serafina had betrayed her. He poisoned their relationship. Elena felt a wave of sadness wash over her. The story of her family, of her parents, was becoming increasingly complex, increasingly tragic. It was a story of love, betrayal, ambition, and revenge. And the rings, Elena asked, her voice trembling. The matching rings, what do they mean? Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, profound sorrow. They were a symbol, he said. A symbol of their bond. A symbol of their love. Your father, he took one of the rings. He gave it to your mother as a twisted gesture of his victory. Elena touched the ring on her finger, the cold metal a reminder of the tangled web of relationships, of the secrets and lies that had shaped her life. And now, Alessandro said, his voice firm, Serafina wants to use those rings to rewrite history, to reclaim what she believes is rightfully hers. He looked at Elena, his gaze intense. But we won't let her, Elena. We won't let her win. He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers brushing against her cheek. She found herself holding her breath. Was he going to reveal something more? Chapter 11. Blood on the cobblestones. The touch lingered, a spark in the darkness, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them, forged in danger and shared secrets. Elena found herself leaning into his touch, her heart beating faster, her breath catching in her throat. Alessandro's eyes searched hers, his gaze filled with a mixture of tenderness, longing, and something else. Something that she couldn't quite decipher, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. He slowly withdrew his hand, the warmth fading, leaving a lingering chill in its wake. He cleared his throat, breaking the spell. We should get some rest, he said, his voice a little rough. We have a long day ahead of us. Elena nodded, her cheeks flushed, her mind racing. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of his skin, of the sound of his breathing. She had never felt this way before, this attraction, this pull towards another person, not even with her late husband. It was unsettling, confusing, and undeniable. They lay down on the blanket, a careful distance between them, but the silence was thick with unspoken emotions, with the weight of their shared experiences, with the uncertainty of their future. Elena found it difficult to sleep, her mind replaying the events of the night, the chase, the confrontation, the revelations about her mother and Serafina. She glanced at Alessandro, his silhouette outlined by the faint moonlight. He seemed to be asleep, his breathing deep and even. But she sensed a tension in his body, a watchfulness that never fully subsided. As the hours passed, the first rays of dawn began to creep through the broken windows, painting the ruined monastery in shades of gray and purple. Elena finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of chasing shadows, of hidden faces, of a storm that raged both inside and outside. She awoke to the sound of Alessandro's voice, low and urgent. Elena, wake up. We need to go. She sat up, her body stiff and sore, her mind still groggy. Alessandro was standing by the window, his back to her, his body tense. What is it? She asked, her voice filled with apprehension. He turned around, his face grim.
They found us, he said.
I saw a car approaching. We don't have much time. Elena felt a surge of adrenaline, the fear returning, sharp and visceral. She quickly gathered her belongings, her heart pounding in her chest. They left the monastery through a back entrance, a narrow passage that led to a steep, overgrown path. They moved quickly, silently, their senses on high alert. They reached the bottom of the path and emerged onto a narrow, cobblestone street. It was early morning, the city just beginning to stir. A few people were out and about, their faces sleepy and unconcerned. "We need to get to my car," Alessandro said, his voice low. "It's parked a few blocks from here." They started walking, trying to blend in with the early morning crowd. Elena felt a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched. She scanned the faces around them, looking for any sign of danger. Suddenly, Alessandro grabbed her arm, pulling her into a narrow alleyway.
"Get down," he hissed.
She crouched behind a stack of garbage bins, her heart pounding. She could hear voices, approaching, speaking in Italian. "They're here," Alessandro whispered. "They must have tracked us." He peered around the corner of the alleyway, his eyes scanning the street. He pulled out his weapon, his hands steady. Elena felt a sense of dread, a feeling of being trapped. The alleyway was narrow, a dead end. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The voices grew closer. Elena could see the shadows of several figures, approaching the entrance to the alleyway. Alessandro took a deep breath.
"Stay here," he said, his voice firm. "And don't move."
He stepped out of the alleyway, his weapon drawn. Elena watched him, her heart in her throat. She wanted to scream, to tell him to stop, to run, but she knew she couldn't. She heard the shouts, the exchange of gunfire. She heard Alessandro's voice, strong and defiant. She heard the screams, the sounds of a struggle. Then silence. Elena waited, her body trembling, her breath held captive in her chest. The silence stretched on, agonizingly long. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, her legs shaky. She peered around the corner of the alleyway, her eyes wide with fear. What she saw made her blood run cold. Alessandro was lying on the cobblestones, his body still, his eyes closed. A pool of blood was spreading around him, staining the gray stones a dark, crimson red. Standing over him was Lorenzo, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer, his weapon still smoking.
Elena screamed.
A long, piercing scream that echoed through the quiet morning streets. A scream of grief, of rage, of despair. It felt as though her entire world was collapsing. She had trusted, she had felt, and now.
This.
Chapter 12. The Price of Protection. The Cost of Love. Lorenzo turned, his eyes locking with Elena's. A chilling smile spread across his face. "Well, he said, his voice dripping with malice. "The little bird has come out of hiding." Elena didn't move, didn't speak. She was frozen, paralyzed by grief and terror. She stared at Alessandro's body, his lifeless form a stark contrast to the vibrant, strong man she had come to care for.
So deeply.
Lorenzo took a step towards her, his weapon still pointed at her. "It's over, Elena," he said. "Your protector is dead.
Now you will come with me."
Willingly or not. Elena felt a surge of rage, a primal fury that overrode her fear.
She would not be taken.
She would not be a pawn in their games. She would avenge Alessandro. She looked around, her eyes searching for something, anything, she could use as a weapon. She saw a broken bottle lying on the ground, its jagged edges glinting in the morning light. Lorenzo took another step closer, his smile widening.
"Don't even think about it," he said.
"You're no match for me." Elena lunged, grabbing the broken bottle, her movements fueled by adrenaline and desperation. She swung the bottle at Lorenzo, aiming for his face. He was caught off guard, surprised by her sudden attack. The jagged edges of the bottle grazed his cheek, drawing blood. He staggered back, his eyes widening in surprise and pain. "You bitch!" he screamed, raising his weapon. Elena didn't hesitate. She lunged again, this time aiming for his hand. The bottle shattered against his wrist, the shards of glass embedding themselves in his flesh. He cried out in pain, dropping his weapon. Elena kicked the weapon away, sending it skidding across the cobblestones. She stood over Lorenzo, her body trembling, her eyes blazing with fury. "I will never go with you," she said, her voice low and menacing. I will never be your queen. Lorenzo was on his knees, clutching his bleeding wrist, his face contorted in pain and rage. You will pay for this, he hissed. My mother, she will make you suffer. Elena didn't care. She had nothing left to lose.
Alessandro was dead.
Her world had shattered. All that remained was vengeance. Suddenly, she heard a groan. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. She turned, her heart leaping with a flicker of hope. Alessandro was moving. He was alive. Elena rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. She gently touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his cheek, the curve of his jaw. Alessandro, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. He saw Elena, her face hovering above him, her eyes filled with tears. Elena, he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. You're alive, she said, her voice trembling with relief. You're alive. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his chest. He groaned, his body slumping back against the cobblestones. Don't move, Elena said, her voice urgent. You're hurt.
Badly.
She looked at his wound, a gaping hole in his chest, blood still flowing freely. She knew she had to stop the bleeding, had to get him help. She tore a strip of fabric from her dress and pressed it against his wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. She looked around, her eyes searching for help. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. They stood at a distance, watching, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. Help! Elena shouted, her voice desperate. Someone, please. Call an ambulance. No one moved. No one spoke. They were afraid, paralyzed by the violence, by the presence of the mafia. Elena felt a surge of despair. She was alone. Alessandro was dying, and no one would help them. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the crowd. A woman, older, dressed in simple, nondescript clothes. She had a kind face, a face that radiated compassion. She rushed to Elena's side, kneeling beside her. I'm a nurse, she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Let me help. She took over, her movements efficient and practiced. She assessed Alessandro's wound, her brow furrowed in concern.
He needs a hospital, she said. Now.
But we can't wait for an ambulance. It will take too long. She looked around, her eyes searching for a solution. She saw a delivery truck parked nearby, its driver standing at a distance, watching the scene with a mixture of fear and curiosity. You, she shouted, pointing to the driver.
Come here.
We need your truck. The driver hesitated, afraid to get involved. But the nurse's voice was commanding, her gaze unwavering. He slowly approached, his eyes wide with apprehension. We need to get him to a hospital, the nurse said, her voice urgent.
Now.
Will you help us? The driver looked at Alessandro, his body lying on the cobblestones, his life ebbing away. He looked at Elena, her face streaked with tears and blood, her eyes pleading. He nodded. Yes, he said. I will help. It seemed like a small victory, a small light, but time was running out. Would they make it? Chapter 13. Letters from a Ghost. Promises from the Past. They managed to get Alessandro into the back of the delivery truck, the nurse attending to him, trying to stabilize his condition. Elena sat beside him, holding his hand, her fingers intertwined with his. His skin was cold, his pulse weak, but he was still breathing. The truck sped through the streets, the driver navigating the traffic with a skill born of desperation. Elena kept her eyes fixed on Alessandro's face, willing him to live, praying for a miracle. They arrived at a small, private clinic, a place known for its discretion, a place where questions were rarely asked. The nurse had called ahead, alerting them to their arrival. Alessandro was rushed into surgery, Elena following close behind. She was forced to wait outside, her body trembling, her mind racing. She felt helpless, useless, her fate hanging in the balance. The hours passed, agonizingly slow. Elena paced the waiting room, her footsteps echoing in the silent space. She prayed, she pleaded, She bargained with any higher power that might be listening. Finally, the surgeon emerged, his face tired, his expression unreadable. Elena rushed to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "How is he?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The surgeon sighed. "He's alive," he said. But it was touch and go. He lost a lot of blood. The bullet, it just missed his heart. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, so intense that her knees almost buckled. He was alive. He was going to live. "Can I see him?" she asked. The surgeon nodded. "He's still unconscious. But you can see him." For a few minutes, Elena followed the surgeon to Alessandro's room. He was lying in bed, his body still, his face pale. He was hooked up to machines, monitors beeping softly, tubes and wires connecting him to life support. Elena sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. His skin was still cold, but she could feel the faint pulse, the fragile rhythm of his life. "Alessandro," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're going to be okay. You're going to make it. I know you will." She stayed with him for hours, talking to him, whispering words of comfort, of hope, of love. She told him about her fears, her hopes, her dreams. She told him about her growing feelings for him, feelings that she had tried to deny, to suppress, but that had now blossomed into something undeniable, something profound. As the day turned into night, Elena finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted, her head resting on the edge of Alessandro's bed, her hand still holding his. She awoke to the sound of a voice, weak and raspy. "Elena," she looked up, her heart leaping with joy. Alessandro was awake. His eyes were open, his gaze focused on her. "Alessandro," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're awake. You're alive." A faint smile touched his lips. "I remember," he whispered. "To the alley." "Lorenzo, he's gone," Elena said. "You're safe now." He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his chest. He winced, his body slumping back against the pillows. "Don't move," Elena said, her voice urgent. "You need to rest." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. You saved me," he whispered. You fought for me." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I did," she said. "I would do anything for you." He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the lines of her cheek. "I know," he said, his voice soft. "I know." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions, with the weight of their shared experiences, with the blossoming of a love that had been forged in the crucible of danger and adversity. While Alessandro healed, Elena began investigating Lorenzo's claim regarding his mother. She went back to her father's villa. She found a hidden safe. Inside were letters. Letters to Serafina, and letters from Serafina. The contents were shocking, even for her. The plans, the promises, the betrayals. It would all be revealed. Chapter 14. The Lioness in the Lion's Denver. The letters were a revelation, a window into a past that Elena had only glimpsed in fragments and whispers. They detailed a complex, passionate, and ultimately destructive relationship between her father, Antonio, and Serafina Rossi. It wasn't just a business partnership, as Alessandro had initially believed it was a love affair, a forbidden romance that had burned with an intensity that had ultimately consumed them both. Serafina's letters to Antonio were filled with a fierce, possessive love, a longing for a future that could never be. She wrote of her dreams, her ambitions, her desire to build a new world with him, a world where they could rule together, free from the constraints of their families, their traditions, their obligations. Antonio's letters to Serafina were more guarded, more cautious, but they still revealed a deep affection, a passion that he had tried to suppress, to control, but that had ultimately consumed him. He wrote of his guilt, his fear, his conflicting loyalties. He wrote of his love for his wife, Elena's mother, but also of his undeniable attraction to Serafina, to her fire, her strength, her ambition. The letters also revealed the truth behind Isabella's death. It wasn't just a simple case of a forbidden romance, as Alessandro had believed. It was a carefully orchestrated plot, a conspiracy involving both Antonio and Serafina. They had both agreed to eliminate Isabella and her lover, seeing them as obstacles to their own plans, to their own future together. But the most shocking revelation was the existence of Lorenzo. He wasn't just Serafina's son, he was also Antonio's. He was Elena's half-brother. Elena felt a wave of nausea, of disgust, of betrayal. Her father, the man she had loved and respected, had been capable of such cruelty, such deception. He had fathered a child with another woman, a woman who was his rival, his enemy. And he had kept this secret hidden from her, from everyone. The letters also revealed Serafina's ultimate plan. She hadn't just wanted to rebuild her empire, she wanted to avenge Antonio's death. She believed that Alessandro had been responsible, that he had orchestrated the assassination to reclaim his own power. And she intended to use Lorenzo, her son, Antonio's son, to destroy Alessandro and claim everything that she believed was rightfully hers. Elena knew she had to tell Alessandro. She had to share this burden, this terrible truth, with him. But she was afraid. Afraid of his reaction, afraid of the pain it would cause him, afraid of the consequences. She found Alessandro sitting up in bed, looking stronger, his color returning. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that made her heart ache. "Elena," he said, his voice still weak, but gaining strength. "You're here." She sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Alessandro," she said, her voice trembling. I need to tell you something. Something important." She told him everything. She told him about the letters, about Antonio and Serafina's affair, about Isabella's death, about Lorenzo's true parentage. She told him about Serafina's plan for revenge, her belief that Alessandro had been responsible for Antonio's death. Alessandro listened in silence, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and pain. The silence stretched on, agonizingly long, broken only by the soft beeping of the monitors. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper.
I don't know what to say," he said.
It's like a nightmare. A twisted, horrible nightmare. Elena squeezed his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I know," she said. It's a lot to take in." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "And Lorenzo," he said. He's Antonio's son?" Elena nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "He's my half-brother." Alessandro closed his eyes, his body trembling. He was silent for a long time, lost in his own thoughts, his own grief. Finally, he opened his eyes, his gaze filled with a newfound determination. "We have to stop her, Elena," he said. "We have to stop Serafina. We have to end this cycle of violence, of betrayal, of death." "I know," Elena said. "But how?" Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering resolve. "We go to her," he said. "We confront her. We fight back." He paused. "We go to her lair. The lioness will enter the lion's den, once again." He gave a sly smile. This wasn't over. Chapter 15. Cracks in the Foundation of Family. Serafina's lair, as Alessandro called it, was not what Elena expected. It wasn't a hidden fortress, a secluded villa, or an abandoned warehouse. It was a grand, opulent palazzo in the heart of Rome, a symbol of wealth, power, and respectability. "She's been hiding in plain sight," Alessandro said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and disgust. "Building her empire, consolidating her power, all while pretending to be a philanthropist, a patron of the arts, a pillar of society." They had decided to confront Serafina directly, to challenge her on her own turf. Alessandro was still recovering from his injuries, but he was determined to go through with it. He had insisted on leaving the clinic, against the advice of the doctors, his will stronger than his physical weakness. They arrived at the palazzo in the evening, the building bathed in the soft glow of strategically placed lights. The entrance was grand, imposing, designed to intimidate and impress. Alessandro, leaning heavily on Elena's arm, walked with a slow but determined gait. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face pale but resolute. Elena was beside him, her own heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, the emerald ring on her finger a symbol of her heritage, of her strength, of her defiance. They were met at the entrance by a stern-faced butler who looked at them with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. "We're here to see Signora Rossi," Alessandro said, his voice firm, despite his physical weakness. The butler hesitated, his eyes flicking between Alessandro and Elena. "Signora Rossi is not expecting visitors," he said. "Tell her Alessandro Moretti and Elena Salvatore are here," Alessandro said, his voice laced with a subtle threat. "She'll see us." The butler disappeared inside, leaving them standing in the grand entrance hall, surrounded by marble statues, priceless paintings, and the suffocating aura of old money and hidden secrets. After a few minutes, the butler returned, his expression unchanged. "Signora Rossi will see you," he said. In the library, he led them through a maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The palazzo was a labyrinth, a reflection of Serafina's complex, twisted mind. They reached the library, a vast, imposing room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire was burning in the hearth, casting a warm, inviting glow, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. Serafina was standing by the window, her back to them, her figure silhouetted against the fading light. She turned around as they entered, her eyes locking with Elena's. She was dressed in a flowing, crimson gown, her dark hair cascading down her back. She looked regal, powerful, and dangerous. "Alessandro," she said, her voice a low, melodious purr. "I heard you were indisposed. I'm surprised to see you up and about." "I'm a hard man to kill, Serafina," Alessandro retorted, his voice tight with controlled anger. Serafina's gaze shifted to Elena, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And Elena," she said, "the dutiful daughter, the reluctant bride. What brings you to my humble abode?" "We know," Serafina, Elena said, her voice clear and strong. "We know everything. About you and my father. About Lorenzo. About your plans." Serafina's smile didn't falter.
"Ah," she said.
"The letters. I wondered when you would find them." "You killed Isabella," Alessandro said, his voice filled with accusation. "You and Antonio. You murdered her in cold blood." Serafina's expression hardened. "She was a threat," she said. "A loose end. She had to be eliminated." "And you planned to use Lorenzo, your son, Antonio's son, to destroy me," Alessandro continued. "To avenge a death that you orchestrated." Serafina's eyes flashed with anger. "Antonio was mine," she hissed. "He belonged to me. And you took him from me." "He was never yours, Serafina," Elena said, her voice filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "He was a man torn between two worlds, two women. He made his choices. And he paid the price." "He chose her," Serafina said, the venom dripping from her voice. She could still not bring herself to say the name. "He chose your mother. And she didn't even fight. He created a lie, and she believed him." Serafina took a step closer, her eyes locked with Elena's.
"This isn't just about the past.
Or a title. It's about love and hate. And family. I wanted you to know the truth. All families have cracks. But cracks can be mended. Or destroyed." She let the words hang in the air, waiting. Chapter 16. The Unveiling of Ancient Secrets.
Elena met Serafina's gaze, unflinching.
"You talk about family," Elena said, her voice steady, "but you've built your life on lies and deceit. You manipulated my father. You used Lorenzo. You tried to destroy Alessandro. That's not family. That's a perversion of it." Serafina laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Sentimentality," she scoffed. "A weakness you inherited from your mother. She was too soft, too trusting. That's why she lost." "She lost a husband," Elena retorted, "but she gained something you'll never understand. She gained peace. She escaped your world of shadows and lies." Alessandro stepped forward, his hand resting on Elena's arm, a gesture of support and solidarity. "It's over, Serafina," he said, his voice firm. "Your plan has failed. Lorenzo is he's no longer a threat. Serafina's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. What have you done?
She hissed.
He's been dealt with, Alessandro said, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't elaborate, didn't reveal the details of Lorenzo's fate. It was a lie, a calculated move to unsettle Serafina, to gain the upper hand. In truth, Lorenzo had been arrested, taken into custody by contacts Alessandro had within the police force, contacts who were loyal to him, who understood the threat that Serafina posed. Serafina's composure began to crack, the mask of control slipping, revealing the raw, unhinged fury beneath. You lie, she screamed. You're bluffing. Am I? Alessandro asked, his voice calm, his gaze unwavering.
Call him.
See for yourself. Serafina hesitated, her eyes darting between Alessandro and Elena. She knew they were telling the truth. She could sense it. Her plan had unraveled. Her empire was crumbling. She let out a cry of rage, a primal scream that echoed through the library. She lunged at Alessandro, her hands reaching for his throat. Elena reacted instinctively, stepping in front of Alessandro, shielding him with her body. She grabbed Serafina's wrists, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't, Elena said, her voice low and menacing. Don't you dare touch him. Serafina struggled against Elena's grip, her eyes blazing with hatred. You're just like her, she hissed. You're weak. You're pathetic. You'll never be a match for me. Elena held her gaze, unflinching. I may not be a match for you in strength, she said, but I have something you'll never have. I have integrity. I have love. And I have the truth. She released Serafina's wrists, pushing her away. Serafina stumbled back, her face contorted in rage and disbelief. The truth, Elena continued, is that you're a broken woman, Serafina. You're consumed by hatred, by revenge, by a past that you can never change. You've lost everything, and you have no one to blame but yourself. Serafina stared at Elena, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and something else. Something that looked like despair. Suddenly, she turned and ran, disappearing into the depths of the palazzo. Alessandro and Elena watched her go, their bodies tense, their senses on high alert. She's gone, Elena said, her voice trembling. But it's not over.
Is it?
Alessandro shook his head.
No, he said.
It's not over.
Not yet.
He looked around the library, at the rows of books, at the symbols of wealth and power that surrounded them. He knew that Serafina had other secrets hidden within these walls, other weapons at her disposal. He walked over to a large, antique desk, its surface covered in papers and documents. He began to search, his movements methodical, his eyes scanning the details. Elena watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a sense of unease, a feeling that they were still in danger, that Serafina was still lurking, waiting to strike. Alessandro suddenly stopped, his gaze fixed on a particular document. He picked it up, his hand trembling. What is it? Elena asked, her voice filled with apprehension. Alessandro didn't answer. He read the document, his face paling, his eyes widening in disbelief.
Alessandro?
Elena repeated, her voice more urgent. What is it? What's wrong? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound sorrow, a devastating truth. It's a confession, he said, his voice barely a whisper. From your father. To my father. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. A confession? What had her father confessed? What other secrets were about to be unveiled? This could change everything. The past had more control than they thought. Chapter 17. A Reckoning Under the Roman Sky. Elena took the document from Alessandro, her hands trembling. It was written in her father's distinctive handwriting. The ink faded, the paper yellowed with age. It was addressed to Giovanni Moretti, Alessandro's father, a man who had died many years ago, a man who had been Antonio's sworn enemy. The confession detailed a conspiracy that went back decades, a plot that had shaped their family's histories, a betrayal that had far-reaching consequences. It revealed that Antonio and Giovanni, despite their public animosity, had been secretly working together, manipulating events, controlling their families, amassing power and wealth. They had orchestrated the feud between their families, using it as a cover for their own illicit activities. They had used the violence, the betrayals, the deaths, as a means to an end, a way to consolidate their control over the Roman underworld. Isabella's death, the event that had supposedly sparked the feud, had been a calculated move, a sacrifice designed to further their own ambitions. They had both agreed to eliminate her and her lover, seeing them as a threat to their carefully constructed plans. But the most shocking revelation was the true purpose of their alliance. They had been working together to create a new order, a new power structure, not just in Rome, but across Italy, across Europe. They had been planning to overthrow the existing mafia families, to establish their own dynasty, a dynasty that would rule with an iron fist. Elena felt sick to her stomach. The world she thought she knew, the history she had been told, was a lie. Her father, Alessandro's father, they had been monsters, manipulating their families, their friends, their enemies, for their own selfish gain. This can't be true, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, profound sorrow. It is true, Elena, he said. I suspected something like this. I didn't want to believe it. He had always known that his father was a ruthless man, a man who had built his empire on blood and fear. But he had never imagined that he was capable of such cold-blooded calculation, such profound betrayal.
But why?
Elena asked. Why would they do this? Why would they sacrifice so much, betray so many, for power? Alessandro shook his head. I don't know, Elena, he said. I don't understand it. I don't think I ever will. The confession also revealed one final, devastating secret. Antonio had not been assassinated by a rival family, as everyone believed. He had been killed by Giovanni. Giovanni had decided that Antonio had become a liability, a threat to his own ambitions. He had ordered his death, making it look like a rival hit, eliminating his partner, his friend, his brother in betrayal. Elena felt a wave of grief wash over her, so intense that she almost collapsed. Her father, the man she had loved and respected, had been murdered by his own partner, his own ally. And Alessandro had been living with this lie, this burden, for years. Alessandro, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I am so sorry. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. It's not your fault, Elena, he said. It's the legacy of our fathers. A legacy of lies, of betrayal, of death. They stood there, in the opulent library, surrounded by the symbols of wealth and power, the ghosts of the past swirling around them. They were the inheritors of this legacy, the victims of this conspiracy. Suddenly, they heard a noise. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. They turned, their senses on high alert. Serafina was standing in the doorway, a small, silver pistol in her hand. She was smiling, a chilling, triumphant smile. Did you really think it would be that easy? She said, her voice soft and menacing. Did you really think I would just disappear? She raised the pistol, aiming it at Alessandro. This ends now, she said. With you. And with the legacy of our fathers. As the sun set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the Roman sky, a reckoning was about to take place. A reckoning that would determine the fate of two families, the future of a city, and the destiny of two lovers caught in the crossfire. The past had caught up to them, demanding justice, and the price was yet to be decided. Chapter 18. The Taste of Ashes and Redemption.
Elena reacted instinctively.
She stepped in front of Alessandro, shielding him with her body, her eyes blazing with defiance.
No,
she shouted. You won't touch him. Serafina laughed, a cold, chilling sound. Move, Elena, she said, or you'll die with him. I'm not afraid of you, Serafina, Elena said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her body. You're a broken woman, consumed by hatred and revenge. You have nothing left. Serafina's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening. "You know nothing," she hissed. "You know nothing of what I've suffered, of what I've lost." "I know you've lost your soul," Elena retorted. "You've become the very thing you claim to despise. A monster, driven by ambition and a thirst for power." Serafina's finger tightened on the trigger. "Enough," she screamed. "I will end this now." Suddenly, Alessandro moved, pushing Elena aside. He lunged at Serafina, his weakened body fueled by adrenaline and a desperate will to protect the woman he loved. He grabbed Serafina's wrist, forcing the pistol upwards. The shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling, showering them with plaster and dust. They struggled, a desperate, chaotic fight for control of the weapon. Alessandro, despite his injuries, was surprisingly strong, his movements driven by a primal instinct to survive, to protect. Elena watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She had to do something, had to help him. She saw a heavy, bronze statue on a nearby pedestal. She grabbed it, her hands wrapping around the cold metal. She raised it above her head, her body trembling with the effort. She brought the statue down on Serafina's head, a sickening thud echoing through the library. Serafina crumpled to the ground, unconscious, the pistol slipping from her grasp. Alessandro stood over her, his chest heaving, his body trembling. He looked at Elena, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and love. "Elena," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She rushed to his side, embracing him, holding him tight. "It's over," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's finally over." They stood there, in the silence of the library, surrounded by the aftermath of the struggle, the ghosts of the past finally laid to rest. The police arrived, alerted by the gunshot. They took Serafina into custody, her reign of terror finally at an end. Alessandro was taken back to the clinic his injuries tended to. Elena stayed by his side, watching over him, her love for him growing stronger with each passing moment. As Alessandro recovered, they began to pick up the pieces of their lives, to rebuild what had been shattered by the revelations of the past. They decided to expose the truth, to reveal the conspiracy that had shaped their families' histories, to bring justice to those who had been wronged. It was a difficult, painful process, but they faced it together, their love for each other a source of strength, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They sold the palazzo, donating the proceeds to charities, a symbolic act of cleansing, of moving on from the legacy of their fathers. They returned to the modest apartment in Trastevere, their sanctuary, their refuge, their home. One evening, as they sat on the small balcony, overlooking the vibrant neighborhood, Alessandro took Elena's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Elena," he said, his voice soft, his eyes filled with love. I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, standing there, at your father's funeral, a lioness in the midst of wolves." Elena's heart overflowed with emotion. "I love you too, Alessandro," she said, her voice trembling. "I have loved you for longer than I realized." He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their future together. The taste of the past, the taste of ashes and betrayal, was finally fading, replaced by the sweet taste of redemption, of hope, of a love that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. A love that had conquered all. But they had forgotten one very important, very dangerous loose end. Chapter 19. Flight from the Flames of the Past. The loose end, as Elena and Alessandro would soon agonizingly rediscover, was not entirely extinguished. While Serafina was incarcerated, awaiting trial for multiple charges, including attempted murder, conspiracy, and a litany of other crimes unearthed from her meticulously hidden past, the seeds of her influence had taken root deeper than they anticipated. They had settled into a semblance of normalcy, the apartment in Trastevere becoming a haven of quiet intimacy. They shared meals, stories, and the slow, gentle rediscovery of each other, free from the immediate shadows of their family's legacies. Alessandro's strength was returning, both physically and emotionally, mirroring Elena's own journey of healing and self-discovery. One seemingly ordinary evening, as they were preparing dinner together, a simple act that had become a cherished ritual, the doorbell rang. Alessandro, ever cautious, checked the peephole. His face tightened, a flicker of alarm crossing his features. "It's Marco," he said, referring to Elena's cousin, the man whose oily charm had always concealed a viper's ambition. What could he possibly want? Elena felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. Marco had been conspicuously absent since her father's death and the subsequent upheaval. She had assumed he was laying low, reassessing his position in the drastically altered landscape of power. Alessandro opened the door, cautiously. Marco stood in the hallway, his usual slick demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. He was sweating, his eyes darting around as if expecting trouble. "Alessandro." "Elena," Marco began, his voice a strained whisper. "I need your help. I'm in danger." Alessandro raised an eyebrow, skeptical.
Danger?
"From whom, Marco? Your own shadow?" Marco flinched, his face flushing. "It's Serafina's people. They're not happy with what happened. They think I know things. About her operations. About Lorenzo." Elena stepped forward. "What things, Marco? What do you know?" Marco hesitated, his eyes flickering between Elena and Alessandro. I was involved. More than you know. Serafina, she had me doing things. Things I'm not proud of." Alessandro's expression hardened. "Get to the point, Marco. What do they want?" "They want information. They think I have documents. Proof. Evidence that could implicate them further. They're threatening my family, Elena. My wife, my children." Marco's voice cracked, a genuine note of fear breaking through his usual facade. Elena felt a flicker of sympathy for him, despite her deep-seated distrust. She knew the fear of losing family, the terror of having loved ones threatened. "What kind of documents?" Alessandro asked, his voice sharp. "Financial records. Lists of names. Details of operations. Things Serafina kept hidden. Things even you didn't know about." Marco looked at Elena, a desperate plea in his eyes. "I need your protection. You're the only ones who can help me." Alessandro and Elena exchanged a look. This was a complication they hadn't anticipated. Serafina's reach, even from prison, was longer than they had imagined. And Marco, despite being a treacherous opportunist, was family, however distant. "We'll help you, Marco," Elena said, her voice firm. "But you need to tell us everything. No more secrets. No more lies." Marco nodded, relief flooding his face. "I will. I swear. I'll tell you everything." They brought Marco inside, the apartment suddenly feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a besieged fortress. As Marco began to reveal the extent of his involvement with Serafina, detailing a network of corruption and violence that stretched far beyond what they had uncovered, a chilling realization dawned on them. Serafina's plan wasn't just about revenge, it was about control. Control of a vast criminal empire, one that extended its tentacles into every corner of Italian society. And they were now caught in the middle of it again. As Marco was speaking, his voice rising in panic as he described the threats against his family, the phone rang. Alessandro answered it, his face paling as he listened. He hung up, his hand trembling. "That was the clinic," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Serafina, she's escaped." Elena felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. This wasn't over. It was far from over. Serafina was free, and she would be coming for them. The flames of the past, which they thought they had extinguished, were now raging once more, threatening to consume everything they held dear. They knew they couldn't stay. Serafina would expect that. She knew too much. They needed to disappear, and fast. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. The escape of Serafina Rossi sent a shockwave through their fragile peace, shattering the illusion of safety they had carefully constructed. The news hung in the air, thick with the threat of imminent danger, a stark reminder that the past, like a vengeful spirit, refused to stay buried. "We need to leave," Alessandro said, his voice urgent, his eyes scanning the apartment, assessing their options.
Now.
She'll be coming for us. For Marco. Elena nodded, her mind racing, trying to formulate a plan. Where can we go? She asked. She knows about this place. She knows about everything. Alessandro's gaze fell upon a small, antique wooden box on a shelf, a box that had belonged to his grandfather, a box that contained secrets of its own. There's one place, he said, his voice low. A place she doesn't know about. A place off the grid. He retrieved the box, its surface worn and smooth from years of handling. Inside, nestled among faded photographs and yellow documents, was a set of keys and a map, marked with cryptic symbols. This, Alessandro said, holding up the map, leads to a remote villa in Tuscany. It belonged to my grandfather. It's been abandoned for years. No one knows about it except me. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only option. They couldn't stay in Rome. Not with Serafina on the loose, her network of contacts undoubtedly searching for them. Marco, pale and trembling, watched them, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. What about me? He asked. What about my family? Elena looked at Alessandro, her expression questioning. They couldn't leave Marco behind, not with Serafina's people hunting him. But taking him with them would increase the risk, make them more vulnerable. Alessandro hesitated, his mind wrestling with the dilemma. He knew Marco was a liability, a weak link, but he also knew that abandoning him would be a betrayal, a violation of the very code of family loyalty that had been twisted and corrupted by their ancestors. He comes with us, Alessandro said, his voice firm. We'll protect him. We'll protect his family. They packed quickly, taking only the essentials. Elena grabbed the emerald ring, her mother's ring, a symbol of her strength, her heritage, her love for Alessandro. They left the apartment, their sanctuary, their refuge, venturing out into the night, the city lights casting long, ominous shadows. They were fugitives, hunted by a ghost from the past, their future uncertain, their lives hanging in the balance. They drove through the night, Alessandro navigating the winding roads, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, his body tense and alert. Elena sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm, a silent gesture of support and solidarity. Marco sat in the back, his face buried in his hands, his body trembling. They reached the Tuscan villa in the early hours of the morning, the building shrouded in mist, a ghostly silhouette against the backdrop of rolling hills and vineyards. It was a place of beauty, of tranquility, but it also felt isolated, vulnerable, a potential trap. They spent the next few days securing the villa, setting up defenses, preparing for Serafina's inevitable arrival. Alessandro, despite his lingering weakness, was a force of nature, his determination fueled by a fierce protectiveness toward Elena and a burning desire for justice. Elena, too, found a newfound strength within herself, a resilience that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. She was no longer the grieving daughter, the reluctant bride, the pawn in someone else's game. She was a warrior, a survivor, a woman fighting for her life, for her love, for her future. One evening, as the sun set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the Tuscan landscape, they knew. Serafina had found them. They saw the headlights approaching, winding their way up the narrow, treacherous road that led to the villa. They were trapped, cornered, with nowhere left to run. Alessandro and Elena stood side by side, their hands clasped together, their eyes locked, their hearts beating as one. They were ready. They would face Serafina together. They would fight for their lives, for their love, for their freedom. As the car screeched to a halt in front of the villa, Serafina emerged, her face a mask of cold fury, her eyes blazing with hatred. She was surrounded by her men, armed and dangerous. It ends here, Serafina said, her voice echoing through the stillness of the evening. This time, there will be no escape. Alessandro stepped forward, his voice calm, his gaze unwavering. It ends here, Serafina, he said. But not the way you think. The final confrontation had begun. Hearts and loyalties would be tested, and the legacy of their families would be decided, once and for all, under the watchful gaze of the Tuscan moon. The showdown wasn't just with Serafina, but it was time to also deal with Marco. Epilogue. The confrontation was swift, brutal, and decisive. Alessandro, despite his weakened state, fought with the ferocity of a cornered lion, his movements precise and deadly. Elena, armed with a courage she never knew she possessed, stood by his side, her determination fueled by love and a fierce will to survive. Marco, however, proved to be the weak link, the liability Alessandro had feared. As the fighting erupted, he panicked, attempting to flee, to betray them to Serafina in a desperate bid for self-preservation. But his treachery was short-lived. One of Serafina's men, mistaking him for an enemy in the chaos, shot him, ending his life with a single, brutal act. The battle raged around the villa, the sounds of gunfire and shouts echoing through the tranquil Tuscan night. Alessandro and Elena fought back-to-back, a formidable team, their love for each other a shield against the darkness that surrounded them. Finally, it came down to a face-off between Alessandro and Serafina. They stood facing each other, their eyes locked, their bodies tense and ready. "It's over, Serafina," Alessandro said, his voice cold and hard. "Your reign of terror is at an end." Serafina laughed, a chilling, mirthless sound. "You think you've won, Alessandro?"
she said.
"You think you can escape the past? You're just like your father, just like mine. You're all monsters, driven by ambition and a thirst for power." "I'm nothing like them," Alessandro retorted, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm fighting for love, for justice, for a future free from your poison." Serafina lunged at him, a knife flashing in her hand. Alessandro sidestepped the attack, his movements swift and agile. He disarmed her, his grip tightening on her wrist, forcing her to drop the weapon. He held her there, his eyes blazing with anger, with contempt, with a flicker of pity. He could have killed her, ended her life with a single, decisive act. But he didn't. "I'm not a murderer, Serafina," he said. "I won't stoop to your level." He released her, pushing her away. Serafina stumbled back, her face contorted in rage and disbelief. At that moment, the police arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing. They had been alerted by a neighbor who had heard the gunfire. Serafina was arrested, her henchmen rounded up, their reign of terror finally brought to an end. Alessandro and Elena watched as Serafina was led away, her eyes filled with hatred, with defiance, with a flicker of despair. They were free. The past was finally laid to rest. The cycle of violence, of betrayal, of death, had been broken. They returned to Rome, to the apartment in Trastevere, their sanctuary, their home. They rebuilt their lives, slowly, painstakingly, but with a newfound strength, a newfound purpose. They dedicated themselves to exposing the truth, to bringing justice to the victims of their family's long and bloody history. They established a foundation dedicated to helping those who had been harmed by organized crime, to breaking the cycle of violence and corruption. They found peace, finally, in each other's arms, in the quiet intimacy of their shared life. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love than ever before. Years passed. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the battles they had fought, the losses they had endured, but they had also learned to live with them, to draw strength from them. One day, as they were sitting together, they got a call. Lorenzo had requested to see Elena. She agreed. She entered the visiting room. He looked broken and lost. He finally spoke. "I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything." Elena simply nodded. Lorenzo continued, "I understand if you can never forgive me, but can you ever forgive him?
Can you forgive
our father?" Elena looked at Lorenzo and after a long silence said, "I already have." The sun was shining. The future stretched before them, bright and promising, a future free from the shadows of the past, a future filled with love, with hope, with the promise of a new beginning. The end.